Thank you, and thanks for attending this, as she said, the final session of for this stage at INTERGEO this year. It's been a fantastic event for all of us. I hope it has been for you too. What we wanted to do this afternoon is just take a few minutes and go through some of the research and observations that we've had at the World Geospatial Industry Council, which is a global nonprofit of geospatial and Earth observation companies that you've been visiting for the last several days. About 3 years ago, we started on this mission to better understand the differences between the thinking in industry and geospatial job hiring managers, and higher education in particular, but more broadly, all education. So when we talk to industry, they say we can't hire enough qualified people. And whenever we talk to academia and academics, they say, well, nobody ever tells us what they want to hire. And if we look at the current job postings, and I'll go through some of this in a little bit, are we seeing a mismatch between what's being taught at the undergraduate, graduate, formal education, certificate levels, and what's actually needed in the workforce? So let's dive in. So if you have spent any time looking at geospatial job postings, you know at any given moment there's thousands or tens of thousands of job openings around the world. And you can filter this down on popular engines like LinkedIn, Indeed. There are many, many others around the world. What that means is that about any given day in 2025, there's probably between 40 and 45,000 geospatial job openings. Not jobs, but job openings, people looking to fill slots. And those are at a variety of levels, of course, from entry level all the way up to senior positions. The industry, as it turns out, grows at a rate of about, depending on whose statistics you want to gravitate towards, probably somewhere between 11 and 14% is consensus. And that's what's called CAGR, or compounded annual growth rate. Year over year, it grows at about that rate. And so this number is going up over time as a translation. So you can imagine if you add 14% to 11,000 every year, you're growing at a pretty good clip. How do the companies fill these positions today? Well, there's a variety of ways. Some of it is what we call upskilling and reskilling. You take existing staff and you move them into a new position, and then you backfill their position. Okay, we can do that for some of our positions, but we're still dealing with a job opening at some level in our organization. We tell our mergers and acquisitions team to just go out and buy me a company. So if I have a big company and I need 100 geospatial people, I just go buy a company that has 100 geospatial people, and then I have them start working on my project instead of what they were doing before. I can solve my talent problem overnight. Now the companies understand that that's A, expensive, and B, not sustainable. You can't do that forever because you run out of companies eventually, right? And so the other option is to just hire on a free market, so that's where people get to decide and have this freedom of choice of who they're going to go for because they're the rock star and they're, all that kind of stuff. That's also super expensive. Companies don't like that. So that's great to say, but what does that actually look like in the data? And so what we tried to do is start putting some definitions. Now, we're very open to saying these aren't the perfect definitions. We're going to look at this over time and try to better understand what the right definition should be, but you have to start somewhere. And so we started was trying to define supply and demand. And the demand is defined up here. It's the need for these professionals that have these specialized skills that want to enter into the geospatial workforce. And then the opposite side of that is the supply, is the availability or the opportunities of job openings to be filled by that demand. And again, these are just definitions so that you can have context around things like statistics and data and stuff. So they're absolutely something that can change over time. So let's look a little more closely at the demand. What we tried to do was break the world into various regions. So we looked at North America, we looked at Europe, we looked at the MENA or the Middle East region, we looked at Latin America, South America, and we looked at APAC. And APAC, for the purposes of data, whenever you look at information like this, is India and China. So all the rest of the people in APAC sort of don't add up to that, and they don't move that number as much as you move that number whenever you look at just India and China. So you can think that through around that. What's really interesting about this is that in North America, the growth rate is just over 10%, probably closer to 11% year over year. And that's representative of that whole global average, if you will, because most geospatial jobs are in North America. If you look at Europe, it's slightly less. The growth is at 8% on the demand growth. And there's just a lower jobs with lower growth rate than you see in North America right now. Then it starts to get interesting. If we look at APAC, if we look at India and China, the demand is going up at a rate that's above the global average. So it's going up at a rate something like 15%. And that's above North America, and it's above the global average. So it's driving that number up. And you can see that you're adding a lot more jobs in APAC over time than you are in North America or anywhere else for that matter. We also see accelerated growth rates in the MENA region and in South America, but those numbers are really small right now. So even though they have accelerated growth, it's going to take them a long arc of time to catch up. And really what we're trying to get a handle on is what's this going to look like between now and 2030 over the next 5 years. And there are certainly external forces, geopolitics, all kinds of things that can change this data, but this is best available data whenever we were collecting it. So this is sort of setting the stage for job growth, right, by region around the world. So then let's flip that and look at the supply side. Okay, that's where all the opportunities are. Where's all the talent coming from? And so we did the same kind of thing for that we did on the demand side. We want to look at region by region, what is the growth in talent? In North America, we're at about 2%. That turns out to be about the global average. If you look at the higher education growth over time, you can go back decades. Higher education is rock solid. They'll come in at 2% growth year over year, every year. The problem with that is that you have an industry that's growing at 6 to 8 times faster than that. So we've got to sort of somehow figure out how we're going to reconcile that. The growth rate in APAC is also about 2%, but you're dealing with much, much larger numbers. And so you're actually adding more people into the workforce, even though it's growing at the same percentage rate. In Europe, what's happening there? Growth is almost completely flat. So in Europe, year over year, the number of students coming out is the same number. And there are lots of reasons for that. And one example that most people can identify with was when they enacted Brexit for the UK. The UK lost something like 40% of their graduate students overnight. And they'll probably not recover from that, certainly not in the next 5 years. But that's had a real material impact on the number of students that are entering into these fields over time. We see similar growth rates in the MENA region and South America, but again, you're dealing with very, very low numbers. So they come across at the bottom of the graph whenever they're stacked up against other areas in the world. Okay, so supply and demand. Let's compare these things against each other on a regional basis. So here we're looking at North America on the left, Europe in the middle, and APAC on the right. And again, we're not forgetting our friends in South America in the MENA region, but those aren't the big driver numbers. They're going to really move these lines around on the slides. And so if we start over here on the left, I know the text came out kind of small, but this blue line, those are the job openings. The orange line are the students or the people coming into the geospatial workforce. So on the left-hand side, I don't need to be an economics major to understand that those two lines are not going to come together, right? Again, I said earlier, look how fast the industry's growing. Up here, we're at 11 to 14%. And look how fast the talent pool is increasing at 2%. What happens in here is anybody's guess. It's going to take everything, every idea, every certificate program, every community college, vocational school, four-year school, corporate training, upskilling, reskilling, and you still don't close that gap. That's how much need there is in the geospatial industry right now in North America. Let's move to the European graph in the middle of the slide here. We still have diverging lines, but it's not nearly as dramatic. The industry is still growing, it's still adding jobs at a rate that exceeds the talent coming into the industry. Finally, let's look at APAC, Asia Pacific, and something different's happening. So in Asian Pacific, we're actually graduating, we're actually adding more talent into the geospatial industry than the rate of job creation. Well, how can that be and still maintain the numbers that we saw earlier? What you're seeing on these three graphs, this talent is not all going into these jobs. Where's that talent going to? It's coming to these jobs, it's coming to these jobs. But at the same time, look how quick the number of job openings is growing in APAC. If you remember back to the previous graph, it was 15% year over year. So at the same time you have talent leaving this region and moving into these other regions, you have opportunity increasing at an accelerated rate above the global average in this region. To put it simply, over the next 5 years, this talent will find jobs here and not have to go here and here. To put it simply, over the next 5 years, these two graphs get more dramatic. That graph evens out. And so the problem is actually a little bit worse than I showed you in those early slides, because that's the part that we need to address. So we have the geospatial workforce in APAC is expected to migrate from developing countries I mentioned earlier, India and China, not only to North America and Europe, and really, you know, that's because of the job mobility, the opportunities. What we're seeing right now are a lot of conversations at the international level, around job mobility. Some of you may have heard of the H-1B visa changes in policy in North America that essentially resulted in a lot of workers returning to their home country. And so there are going to be other actors on some of this data for sure, but the trends, and as I like to say, I want to be directionally correct, not precisely wrong. The trends are directionally correct. They might vary a little bit, so don't get caught up on individual numbers, but this is sort of what's happening. So let's really simplify this and bring it all together into one graph. So over the next 5 years, as I said, you're looking at increased growth rate. Today we're somewhere around 45,000. You know, don't worry too much about the exact number, but we're headed to twice that many job openings over the next 5 years. At the same time, our friends in higher education are growing at that steady 2%, and they, by 2030, over here, will just be getting to the demand of today. So that's the kind of dynamic we're looking at whenever we think about job and workforce development. So if we go back to my title, I'm like, okay, if we're going to double the size of the geospatial industry over the next 5 years, and you can find that in a lot of articles and headlines and research, how do you do that if you don't have enough people to fill all those slots? AI might be able to solve part of that, but it's not going to solve all of it. And what's really interesting is you talk to pretty much every single employer, and they're like, yep, we see that problem every day when we try to hire people. So demand growth. We see the significant demand growth across the globe. It's going to be more accelerated in certain regions of the world, so it's not evenly distributed. And that's not unreasonable to expect. North America and Asia are experiencing the highest growth rates, and Europe will likely continue to be flat or at least at a decelerated rate. On the supply side, we have no reason to expect that 2% is going to change, because higher education is not, they don't think like that. And I spent 13 years running a university program in the States. They don't think like that. They just don't. And so, but we'll see that large number of students from Asia Pacific start to find jobs closer to home. So the gap, significant gap, will exist and continue to exist over that period of time. It's going to be, as I said, sort of everything and anything that you can put as an opportunity into it. So this is a huge opportunistic space for people that want to train and upskill geospatial job force and workforce. So we have our formal education. We add that to non-credit informal education, certificate, reskilling, corporate training. People are looking at things like micro-credentials. What we are seeing across the board is that maybe I don't care so much where you went to school as whether or not you know what you're doing, right? And that comes out. And one of the things I always really appreciated when I taught GIS and taught geospatial is that almost no one is good at it immediately. Everybody comes in at a level playing field, and either they learn and put the time in to learn it, or you can tell pretty quickly that they don't know what they're talking about. So, a couple additional thoughts as we wrap up here. When we think about the geospatial job market, we oftentimes think about a vertical industry. Whenever we do a job search, I'm using keywords like GIS, map, remote sensing, earth observation. Those are all a vertical field. That's a geospatial job. What happens when you take a vertical market and you start to rotate it into a horizontal market? And instead of looking for geospatial jobs, I'm now looking for geospatial and earth observation in the job. Maybe it's not exactly a geospatial job, but it's in a supply chain. It's in healthcare. It's in social services, natural resources, oceans, all kinds of natural, as we like to say at WGIC, geospatial is in everything, and it should be for everyone. And so when you do that, you create even more jobs than what we're showing you here today. Where do those people come from? Because now they also need domain expertise in a particular field. And that's really going to be an increasing need likely into the future. We're also seeing expanding skill sets. So last year I went through one afternoon over lunch and just started looking at a bunch of geospatial jobs on what do people actually ask for on the qualifications. All of these bullet items are actual things from actual job postings on LinkedIn, right? How many of these things are being taught in geospatial courses around the world, right? Who gets to take a course in tolerance for ambiguity whenever they're training for geospatial? Who gets to take a course in legal challenges to data whenever they're in getting their degree or their certificate? I haven't seen it. Maybe you have. If you have, I'd be very interested in talking to you, because as far as I can tell, a lot of these things aren't there in the current ways that we teach. But I think everybody can find one or more of these that they deal with, if not on a daily basis, on a fairly frequent basis in their jobs today around the world. So something to think about as we consider what the future workforce looks like. I think another sort of problem where we're hurting ourselves trying to attract people into our industry is we speak an awful lot about jargon. And so if I'm a farmer, my AI question, don't tell me about your stack and your prompts and everything else. My question is, do I plant my farm today or not? That's it, full stop. That's my AI question. And can you help me or not help me? Right? Don't fill my head up with all this other stuff, because that's not my job, that's your job. Right? I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to plant the field And so don't tell me about your AI. So we have to figure out how to meet people where they're at, not where we wish they were at, with the understanding of some of this technology. And I think this is a great example of that. Then I'll wrap up here, and then I'm serious. I'm gonna open it up to questions. So I encourage you to think about some questions you might have. But you know, historically, our industry has favored the specialist, the person who knew the deep dive, that knew the button pushing, that knew how to make all the maps come out the other end. And I think in the future, as automation takes over some of those steps, it may well favor people who are more generalist, that can really make the tools work in service of something. And so not necessarily how to push all the buttons, but why am I pushing those buttons? And that's going to be a piece that is a differentiator for, if any of you are looking for jobs right now, being able to answer that kind of question moves you from somewhere random in the job list. With the hiring manager, you just went to the top because you understand the why of what you're doing and how to ask those questions and turn those questions into tasks that can be automated or operationalized. So I think that's going to be really important moving forward as well. Certainly reskilling and upskilling favor the long-term learner. You know, many of us that have been in the field, and I'm going probably on 35 years now, we took pride in being lifelong learners, but not everybody was. And I think moving forward, lifelong learner is probably just the cost of entry. That's just the baseline, right? And now you're gonna have to be lifelong learner plus, whatever that means in your particular field. And so I think that's gonna be something that's really important to understand. And then perhaps most importantly, and counterintuitively, I don't need to know how to push all the buttons. What I need is a framework and a set of tools and a approach, if you will, that allows me to work on problems that are hugely complex. And to be okay at the end of the day with going home, not having the ultimate answer to that, but also coming back the next morning just as full of energy to keep working on that problem, right? And that works for everything, right? And that's what allows you then to maintain and sustain a career in geospatial, is that type of approach, I think. Because we don't have easy answers to the climate topics. We don't have easy answers to some of the natural hazards, food security in Africa, sustainable infrastructure, and the list goes on well past this. But I think that's where we're headed in terms of a workforce, and those are the skills that the people in that gap between supply and demand are really gonna need, and if they have them, they're gonna be able to find a job, a good job, because they're gonna be differentiated from everybody else. So I'm gonna stop there. Thank you.